Hello and welcome to Gang Culture Podcast, a series educating you about gang culture. This season, our host Ellis Rouse continues to talk with an array of unique voices to inspire, empower, and cause change. But also this season, we are exploring alternative activities being offered to teens in Delaware. Whether you are listening at home, school, or on the way to work, we hope you enjoy and share with others.
Welcome back to Gang Culture. I'm your host, Ellis Rouse, and this week we are joined by musician, barber, and student advocate Anthony Floyd. Anthony is on the ground level of dealing with today's youth and being an advocate for various school systems in the Delaware area. Anthony, thank you for joining us on Gang Culture.
Of course. My pleasure, brother.
All right, so can you tell us about your role as a student advocate and the communities it serves?
Yeah, most definitely. So, the role as a student advocate, for me, is very simple. It's making sure that I am that bridge to be able to communicate for the children that don't know how to, or for the youth, I should say, that don't know how to communicate. And so it's really just making sure that I connect the dots where the people, I guess you can say, higher up, or the people that are above me that can't connect the dots, I help them connect the dots, So that's really my role, my huge role within the school system. And just making sure that the kids are being serviced properly, and getting what they need socially, emotionally, and, of course, educationally. So
yeah,
that's my role.
Yeah, and that's so important. So we've talked offline, and I teach social and emotional learning, and I got into that during the COVID time, and kids were really like disconnected because they weren't in school, and things changed. So, I can identify with what you're doing and how important it is for these kids to have that, So thank you for that.
Of course.
How do you define gang involvement in today's school environment?
I think it's very prominent, only because I feel like every child wants to fit in, every child wants to belong, every child wants to follow what's new, what's popular. So, whether it's an official gang or not, I think that gang-affiliated programs or gang-affiliated groups are really popular right now. And it's not so that children are wanting to be involved in it. It's just, I feel like it's the lack of confidence and the insecurity that goes along with how they get into it. Mm-hmm. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So sort of like a sense of belonging to something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That insecurity,
Yeah.
Which is why they tend to join.
Yeah. I connect with that because when I was younger, the drug dealers took over my neighborhood. So it became, you felt like you were like isolated, like there was no power. So when a couple of my friends came home from jail, they were introduced to gang life in jail. Right. And when they seen what was going on, they introduced that to the neighborhood, and I wanted to be a part of it because I felt like I had something that I can be a part of. I didn't want to be a drug dealer, and also I didn't like the way they was treating the neighborhood. So
of course, yeah.
So I see what you mean, where just being a part of something, and honestly, I just felt like I had no voice with the drug dealers.
Yeah.
My boys, they came home, even though it was a gang, I knew who they were.
Exactly.
So being affiliated made me feel more confident.
Of course, yep.
What are some of the early warning signs that a student may be at risk for gang involvement?
Low self-esteem, and having a whole lot of insecurities. maybe fitting into the wrong crowds. You'll start to see them start to kind of be more drawn to the bigger crowds, to, what people are doing, following tendencies, you can kind of pick up on, how they think, by maybe some cue words or some code words they might use. They might say, well, this person said this or they said that. I think they're going to do this, So you start to pick up on the lingo and the terminology in which they used, and you kind of start to kind of understand that, okay, this person, they're drawn to this specific kind of group, so you can tell that they're going to, kind of lean towards following them in a sense. And, once you follow somebody, it's not long before you start to do the things that they do, Yeah, it's easy.
Do you think social media plays a part in some of that too?
Absolutely, it plays a huge part. Social media has definitely intellectually dumbed down our culture a lot. Honestly, all cultures, because it forced us to be able to live in a fantasy world to where we can be something that we're not, and to also to belong in a certain demographic or to belong in a certain group or affiliation that doesn't really align with our personalities, our morals, our beliefs, or things that we were just taught on. So whether it's wrong or right.
Yeah. Are there common myths about gangs that people misunderstood?
Myths? I think so. Yeah. I can say there can be some myths. Because, of course, when you hear gang, it has kind of like a negative kind of ideal to it when you think of gang. But a gang is just a group of people, If you put it in a positive light, a gang could be a positive group of influencers, a positive group of this. So I don't think that, the word gang should be negatively used. However, I think it's the idea behind why people join gangs or why people are joining certain gangs. I think that's the most important part.
Yeah. To piggyback off what you said, I joined the Bloods, but like my mom, she seen them as like my brothers.
Right, as family.
She didn't really, she didn't see them as everyone else seen them.
Exactly.
She would take them to church. She would pray for them right on the spot,
right.
Things like
Exactly.
that. Even when we went to church at times, she would ask them to stand up in front of the congregation and identify themselves. And, one of the things that people, in the church, they just couldn't believe. They was like, wow, how do you know these guys? Like, she's like, they're like my sons.
Yeah.
So there's myths there. And, at times people misunderstand where it comes from and what we're doing.
Yeah.
What prevention strategies have you seen that work effectively?
When it pertains to what?
The gang involvement, like being a part of like a gang. So what kind of prevention you think works effectively?
I really believe it has to do with making sure that you expose the youth to programs and expose them to an environment outside of their own. Because I feel like if they're exposed to an environment outside of their own, they're more likely to they're more likely to have that self-confidence, less insecurities, those things that we kind of talked about in the beginning. I feel like if you just expose that child to like different programs and stuff like that within the city, that helps prevent that child from joining gangs, or trying to fit in or things of that nature. I'm trying to think. I'm a firm believer that it takes a village, to raise a person. It takes, a community. So I feel like if everyone's involved, it takes all of us, to be able to be successful. I don't believe that one person can be successful and, that helps the whole community. Now, I believe it takes every single last person to be able to raise up a community, to build wealth within a community, and things of that nature. So I believe if we start there with learning how to volunteer and barter with each other, like kind of like back what they did in the olden days, in the old days, they bartered with each other. They traded, they said, listen, what can you do for me in return that I can do for you, right? Because let's just say you're a plumber, but I'm an electrician. Your house need lights, but, my house needs, some plumbing work. We work together to make sure that those jobs get done. But at the end of the day, we're both successful and both of our houses are taken care of. Now we can take these skills and spread them, right? And I think that's why the beautiful thing about the trade is that's why it'll never die, because of the power that it has to be able to spread wealth, to be able to build up a community, and to be able to kind of have that longevity in teaching and stuff like that,
Yeah.
So
Trades are definitely a great thing to get involved with. A good friend of mine that I actually work out with now, my neighbor, he's always talking to me about how his life changed once he learned how to do home improvement.
Yeah.
And some of the guys in the neighborhood will see him now and they're like, wow, because he has his own business, and they knew how he used to be. Right. And so just to put that out there, like if a kid can get involved with a trade, and learn a skill set,
of course,
yeah. So I agree, bartering and
one thing that I kind of picked up along my way, because I'm a man of many different skills and trades. If you voluntarily learn how to kind of use your gift and use your skills and use your trade capabilities, then everyone is going to be able to succeed off of that. And however, it's kind of like a pay it forward kind of situation, So yeah.
Also, when you mentioned, we talked about social and emotional learning. I thought about a kid that I had a class, and the teacher said to me, this kid, he's very infatuated with gangs, and she didn't know that I have what my involvement with gangs are. So I said, okay. I said, well, if I can get a moment with him, we'll see where it goes. And I'll fast forward to what happened. We had a discussion, and when he found out who I was, he said, he told the teacher, he was like, I need this guy to be here every day. Like he wanted me there all the time, because he was able to connect with me on some things and ask questions.
Of course,
because he had myths. He didn't understand.
He didn't know.
Yeah. So these programs, social and emotional learning programs, and like you mentioned, just being a part of different things so that they can experience and be around other kids that are looking to better themselves.
Of course,
So very important. What policies should schools implement to reduce gang activity?
I don't think it has to do with policies. I feel like I said, it just has to do with that whole community involvement aspect. I don't think it has anything to do with policies, because policies that are in the schools right now, we all know that some of the systems that they have within the school that kind of handicap our youth, that's its own separate problem, and that's its own separate issue. But however, in order for us to kind of keep our children out of gangs or wanting to belong, I feel like we have to put them, keep them busy, right? So I think that has to do with us making sure that we're putting programs in front of them, finding out what intrigues them, right? And that goes back to also finding out, okay, well, why do they want to belong to this? Let's find out exactly why they want to belong to this gang or why they want to be affiliated with this. So let's come up with a program, or let's come up with something that intrigues them just as much just inside the school, but in a positive way. So I don't think that has to do with policies. I think it just has to do with making sure that there's more community involvement and realistic approaches as well. Because I feel like the approaches that the systems and the policies are right now, they are not realistic approaches to be able to actually relate to the children and to also reach the children. They're not realistic, So I don't think it has anything to do with policies.
Yeah. Something you mentioned, asking them and hearing what they really want to be involved with.
Yeah.
I think about how I got involved with community outreach, and what started me off was just being a father, and my sons were around a group of kids that I seen could be going in a direction that could have been negative.
Yeah.
So, funny enough, I found out about their activity at a meeting, a neighborhood meeting, and everybody was talking about that group of kids. So my question was, okay, what do we do about it? But nobody had anything to say.
Yeah.
So one thing led to the other, and I had an opportunity to approach them because they were about to start fighting, and then a neighbor knocked on my door and said, your boys are up there. So I went out there and I got in the middle and stopped the fight. And my next thing was, okay, what can we do to change this energy?
Yeah.
And I asked them, I said, what do you guys like to do? So right there it was formed. We figured out what they like to do. Yeah. At the time it was basketball. They just wanted to be a part of something. Some of them couldn't play basketball on the school team, so this was the opportunity to have something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it worked. It really did.
And most times that's how it end up going. Some of them don't have the opportunity. Some of them don't have the means to be able to be a part of the things that they want to be a part of. So therefore, if you give them that outlet and give them that opportunity to be a part of it, then they won't have that idle time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also a believer that having a whole bunch of time on your hands ain't too good. So that's usually how that's another way how people start to gravitate towards gangs and stuff like that, or just doing things that are not sensible.
Yeah, that idle time. The same group. So when we were able to run the program, they were good, and when the funding wasn't available to run the program, they got into stuff, and it's sad that they were great kids until they didn't have anything to do.
They have an outlet.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. What can parents look for or do if they're worried about gang influence?
Present the youth with more opportunities. I said that already. Present them with more opportunities, making sure that they also have more of a presence, being present. I think that plays a huge role in making sure that you're attentive. The youth, they need that attention. Why? Because you never know when there's a time where they might need to express, hey, listen, right now I'm feeling this. And we all know that, youth, the emotional aspect is always up and down. One day they're feeling this, one day they're feeling that. Of course, because they don't know and they're not intellectual enough to understand how they're feeling. But if you can be that guide and help support them through that growth of learning how to cope with their emotions or cope with their feelings and stuff like that, by being present, if you can teach them and help guide them through that, I believe that creates a safer space for them to be able to come to you or come to their parents and say, hey, listen, I'm really into this right now. Is this a good idea? So then you're able to give that feedback and say, hey, listen, that's not really the wise choice. But because you're into this, let me show you something that's maybe that's relative to this, that you can do to channel that energy somewhere else, to where it's not negative, but it's positive, So I believe that presence, being attentive, being present, also giving that youth an opportunity to make sure they have a voice. Now, I kind of grew up, with old school parents, so I'm not going to say don't give them too much power and too much say so, of course, because you're the parent and they're the child.
Keep structure.
Also, exactly, to keep the structure, but make sure that they have a voice to be able to for when they are safe and when they feel comfortable to come to you, to tell you exactly what they need in that moment, what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Communication is key.
Yeah.
I believe it saved me because I communicated with my mom.
Oh wow.
She wasn't in the dark about what I was into and who my friends were, and nobody had to hide their colors when they got around my mom. It was like, I know. That's why I said the church would be like, these guys, and
right.
like, well, my son approached me about this whole thing, and
right.
So communication and being open and honest.
Being open and honest.
Yeah.
But you have to have that space in order to do that, though.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I agree. I felt safe enough. My mom, she gave me that voice.
That's good. Yeah.
To feel safe and that I communicate with her and we would get through it together.
Yeah.
So Anthony, I appreciate this time and the conversation.
Of course.
And continue to do the great work that you're doing out there.
I appreciate that. It was well needed.
Yeah, thank you.
That, brother.
We hope you found this episode informative. We look forward to continuing the conversation and stay tuned for our next episode.
You're listening to a production from The Cause. Learn more at causetheworld.com.